Hi, if you're watching this video, you must be interested in short sales. Today, I'm sharing with you a class that I recently taught to local realtors about the top 10 things they need to be aware to help you, the consumer, when you're buying a short sale. So I'm going to bring you to the source and invite you to join the class virtually. It was taught virtually originally, but although it's not live, you please comment either below and I'll get back to you privately with some answers and we can discuss what your questions and concerns are. So grab a cup of coffee, enjoy. It is about an hour long, but of course, if you're watching the recording, you can fast forward. Look forward to touching base again about what your particular questions are. Please know I'm always here to help. Take care. So, top 10 things buyers need to know about short sales. There, is that better? Okay, here we go. So this is, again, what to expect. Today, we're going to just briefly do our introductions like we did. Please put your comments in the chat. We'll go through the presentation. Please stay muted. I want to hear what your thoughts and your questions. That's why I'm going to kind of go through the presentation quickly so that we can have a very dynamic Q&A section, more importantly. So who am I? If you don't know me, I'm with the mainline office of KW. I started in short sales in 2008 when I was selling real estate in Hawaii, where we got hit with the mortgage crisis early and very hard. As the surfers watched the waves, I could see it was the next wave hitting the shore. And I decided to specialize in it when most of my colleagues most people didn't really even know what a short sale was. So that led me to a lot of firsthand experience. And from that, I learned I need to work with a negotiator because as a realtor, I can't be handling all that paperwork. Long story short, doing short sales here in Philadelphia, I got to meet the Real Estate Recovery Group early last year at one of their masterminds and met Leah personally, who I'm very happy to be working with now, and has a different approach that I wanted to share a little bit about because it's, not what's commonly done here in Philadelphia, but it's much more successful for buyers. Leah's on, she will be joining us in the live Q&A. So number one tip, again, you probably already know this, short sales are long. That's not really an inside story, but just to set expectations as a buyer agent, you need to future pace your buyers. You have to expect a minimum of 3 months. Now, Real Estate Recovery Group on occasion does beat that. I'm working with Leah right now where we may, once we're under contract, we may be looking at, 45-day close. But those are the exceptions, not the rule. So going in with your initial offer, please, we'll get into the agreement of sale tips. But when you're talking to buyers and trying to find out what their home buying goals are, a short sale will take a minimum of 3 months. And to the second point, we cannot control the closing date. So, if your buyer has a hard situation, it's really important to understand, like if they're on a month-to-month, that's ideal. Or if they have the option to be living with family, the settlement date is a target. It's nothing that normally when you write an agreement of sale, buyer has control. They ask for a settlement date, they've got it. In this situation, neither buyer or seller can control that. We are going to massage and navigate the negotiations and as best we can, but the lien holder's in control. Now the buyer does need to be prepared, and we'll go over this a little bit more. Once the lien holder approves, they need to be ready to settle within 30 days of lien holder approval. Again, we cannot change those terms. Once the approval comes back, if we don't settle before the end of whatever time frame they dictate, because it is a dictation, it's not negotiable, then the file is closed. So these are some tips, to really just future pace your buyer, help them understand, and to matchmake, because maybe a short sale isn't for them. Maybe another way of finding a value is. It's important to understand their overall situation. Leading to what we're talking about, qualifying their expectations. So when I meet with someone, in fact, I had a Zoom buyer consult last night with a young couple as an example who reached out to me interested in short sales. So immediately I want to understand why. Why did they select short sales? What was their perception? And when I worked, like in Hawaii, I had a very high presence on Google for short sales. I met a lot of buyers interested in a short sale. And at the end of the day, really what they're looking for, typically, always be open-minded, but normally they're looking for a below market opportunity. something out of the box. They don't want to pay retail, they want to pay wholesale. Or sometimes they might just love this particular house. You know, like I have a mid-century in Bryn Mawr that now is a short sale. That might be a buyer who wants the neighborhood, wants the school district, wants to get into a market where there's not much on the market. However, it happens to be a short sale. Okay, in that sense, we want to help them navigate an unfamiliar process that they didn't really want to be involved in, but it could be a great match for what their overall goals are. So ask some questions. You know, again, you can get these slides that this will help you. There are many myths about buying a foreclosure out there. So what I suggest, and I'm happy to do follow-up calls if you want to go in more depth about what that conversation might look like. But I always go over the pros and cons of a foreclosure, bank-owned foreclosure, which usually they don't really know what REO means, versus a short sale. Especially if you're working with internet leads, we get a lot of inquiries through Zillow because Zillow has started publishing properties that are pre-foreclosure where a legal notice or lis pendens has been filed, and consumers get so confused. They think that that's actually for sale. So this is just a tip for, you know, a little aside, when you get a lead like that, these questions can help you as well. Like, why were they interested in this? What are their expectations? What are they looking for? At a very top level, a bank-owned foreclosure, one of the advantages is you can put a settlement date in and hold them accountable to that. You have more control of the settlement date. It is more of a direct negotiation. You're going to get a counter, you're going to get an acceptance, then you move from there. The downside of a bank-owned foreclosure is, which you already know, it's probably been vacant a very long time. There's no seller's disclosure. It's definitely, you know, buyer beware. You know, you want to do some very detailed inspections because, and also they won't, you know, there's a few little, if you've sold foreclosures, sometimes you can get a little concession on something that wasn't known before, or depending on who the listing agent is and how successful they are at working with asset managers. Generally, there's no concessions, no information. Everything's on you as a buyer agent. You have to help your buyer with due diligence, but the terms of the agreement are more straightforward in the sense of you have an accepted price, it's accepted. You have a closing date, we'll go with the closing date. And then it's just on you as a buyer to perform with the closing date. You know, for a short sale, you have the seller involved because they have skin in the game. They are looking for debt forgiveness. They're looking for a resolution in a bad situation. So they are obligated to provide a seller's disclosure. They are obligated to maintain the property in the same condition in general, although it is an as-is sale. So they do have a vested interest in seeing it succeed. So those are just on a surface level. That could be a whole nother class. So, you know, you want to touch on those, feel out your buyer's points of pain, you know, how risk adverse they might be, and what might be the best way to find them a value if that's what they're looking for. And of course, there's always just a motivated seller or an off-market opportunity if you can find them. Listing price is not necessarily real. This becomes very confusing, and I want to explain what I mean here. Working with Leah is the first, Leah's company, Real Estate Recovery Group, is the first negotiating company in 12 years that I've worked with where we get involved together from the very time of listing. On occasion, like one deal I'm working with, Leah's company, we did, as soon as I started working with them, they were able to submit the documentation and get a pre-approved valuation back from the lien holder, which is the first time I ever experienced that. Normally, I'm shooting in the dark as a listing agent because the typical negotiating companies don't get involved until you have an accepted offer. So the listing price, even with that, is not necessarily the final price. But I have an obligation as a listing agent to the lien holder to try to get the highest the market will bear. They're going to look at the history of the listing once an offer is submitted. And if I start too low, it looks like I'm not representing the seller's interest in trying to resolve that debt at the highest. So sometimes we'll start, well, I'll use Haymarket Lane as the current short sale I have listed. at $599. It's probably too high based on the condition of the home, but I have, it's negotiable. It's a starting place that I have to show. When we show your buyer's offer that comes in lower, we need to show that the market did not respond at the higher number that's very close to resolving the debt. We need to prove to the lien holder that the market doesn't support that price. On rare occasion, if I'm right up against an auction date, I have a couple years ago, I had a Germantown property coming to auction. I listed it at 80,000, which I knew was low, and my phone, literally got so hot it almost melted. But what it did do is drive competing offers. We ended up selling it for cash at 160,000 with competing, like 10 or 13 competing offers. Stopped the auction, and it was a successful situation. Depending on the situation, and of course, then I had to go through educating every single call about what that is. But working, we'll get into questions to ask the listing agent. It's important to know it's not a situation where you write an offer at that number, you can count on acceptance. That's not the situation with short sales. It's dependent upon lien holder approval. So the price may be above what's the real value. It may be below what's the real value. Just as a FYI, most negotiators, as I mentioned before, don't get involved. So, until after the fact. So that comes to massaging the price. We'll cover more of that later, and you can ask Leah some questions directly. So as I mentioned, it's really important as a buyer agent. So you have a buyer interested in a short sale, and you may be dragging your feet and think, oh, I'm going into a Dante's Inferno or something, but it's not that bad. What really helps is to qualify the situation by asking some pointed questions to the listing agent. These 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These 7, I would save. Screen capture it or ask me for the slides. If you're unfamiliar with short sale, this will help you 150%. So one of the very first questions is politely, and you can do your own research to look and see if there's an auction scheduled, but try to find out more about the seller's situation. Is there are we up, like the example I mentioned in Germantown? And I was very transparent about that. Yes. And then you ask the listing agent, do you know if the sellers are behind and how far? You may not know, a lot of listing agents don't know this, that people can do a short sale and not be behind. If a property is underwater, I have worked with luxury owners successfully doing a short sale, resolving a situation where the market provides the hardship. So at any rate, it's important to understand the big picture of where the sellers are, because that affects our navigation to success. Also, how many lenders, any other lien holders? If the listing agent can't answer these questions, I personally make a mental note of that. It makes me wonder how negotiations are going to be. We can talk about ways to bring solutions to the listing agent that can help everyone win. But a listing agent should know these questions, which leads to the fourth one, which is important. Find out who they are using for negotiations. Some realtors do their own negotiations, and maybe that's their primary business. But in my personal experience, like I said, I was doing several files myself and working as a full-time realtor in Hawaii, and you can't really do both, in my opinion, effectively. A negotiator, for instance, once you're under contract, the lien holder will ask for certain documentation. They'll only give you 24 hours. Well, imagine your typical day. You're at 2 appointments, dropping off documents. You may be checking your phone. You're not at your computer right there and then to be able to process the paperwork and respond effectively and notify all parties immediately. So if on the buyer side, we can talk about maybe how you can bring in a solution like Real Estate Recovery Group to make the listing agent's job easier and be a hero, and be in more control. So we'll get a little bit more into that, but most negotiators are simply like paralegals that process paperwork. So in that line, one of the things as a short sale specialist I'm taught to do, I have to qualify the seller. So likewise on the buyer agent, we want to know, has the seller provided complete short sale information to the negotiator and or listing agent? If not, where are they in the process? When I went through the CDPE certification, that was one of the first things they teach you. You know, when you have a listing appointment, this is part of, as a listing agent, qualifying the seller in terms of how willing are they to participate in their own success for their situation. Distressed properties have distressed people. They're facing something in their life that has put them in this situation. As you can relate, at this time, so many people are overwhelmed with our national crisis. You know, people respond to crises differently. And sometimes it's that ostrich syndrome of put your head in the sand and just do nothing. So as a listing agent, I made that mistake early on, taking on someone's situation, and they just were not invested in participating, weren't responding on time with documentation, etc. So I learned the hard way that I can't help someone who's not willing to help themselves. So likewise, find out where, through the listing agent, where the seller is in the process. Get a feel for how motivated they are and to participate and willing. Also ask about, you know, is the negotiator involved yet? Are they talking to the bank? One of the advantages of working with Real Estate Recovery Group, I have 3 files with them active right now. They reach out, as soon as I have the paperwork signed with the seller, they start reaching out to the lien holder. And each lien holder is different. Each process is different. So it's very, very important. For instance, in the one situation, they came back with clear direction. We had to list it at a certain price. That's not always the case, but that dialogue with the bank / lien holder is very important, and you're in the best situation if that happens early. So this may feel awkward, but it's a fair question to ask the listing agent what their experience of short sales is. How many have they done? It's kind of like you don't want to be someone's first surgery. Now, if they're not experienced, this again makes a big difference who the negotiator is. An inexperienced short sale expert working with Real Estate Recovery Group is in a good position because the team there will support the listing agent in success. So, you know, we can talk about how you can bring solutions if you're dealing with a sort of murky situation on the listing side. Maybe your gut feeling is the seller is really not quite there. Oh, great. I was just talking about Real Estate Recovery Group. The owner of the company just joined us. So, sorry, I dropped my earbud. We'll be participating live in the Q&A shortly. So just because the listing agent's not experienced with short sale, that doesn't mean steer your buyer away from it. It means if this is their home, what my goal with this session and any follow-up is to help empower you to help your buyer's dreams come true. And sometimes their heart is just set on that house. So if there are weaknesses and answers to these questions, you know, Real Estate Recovery Group is a great resource to help your success as well as the listing agent and seller's success. Now, we want to help you, empower you to coach your buyers for success. And that's very, very important for your sanity as well as theirs. Upfront, it's best to set expectations up front. I do this even with, you know, a normal buying process. At a buyer consult, as you probably do, you go over what to expect, the different phases in contract to close. More important with a short sale buyer, it is a horse of a different color. You want to, as we touched on, you want to qualify and quantify how willing are they to hang in through the process, what to expect in that process, coach them about documentation. So just to touch on the time frame, typically there are 3 stages of negotiation. Ballpark 30 days with each one, but I didn't put that in there because, you know, it can vary with the lien holder. What's frustrating is there isn't just one negotiator on the other end of the phone that Leah's talking to. They're going through a review process. The very first stage, once the agreement of sale and all the documentation is submitted, is they're going to vet the documentation. Now, we can typically expect, and this is where you need to coach your buyers, as they vet the documentation, they probably 95% of the time, they're going to ask for some either additional documentation on a different form. They may ask for more from your buyer. They may more likely will ask for more from the seller. They sometimes have different forms that they use for the same information. They may want signatures in a different way. So coach your buyer to be prepared for that and expect a quick turnaround requirement, usually 24 to 48 hours. Best to pace yourself for 24-hour turnaround. Now, when and we'll get into that more under the agreement of sale, but the risk of not participating with that 24-hour turnaround, if they don't get the documents they're requiring when they require them, we're at risk of them just canceling the deal, closing out the file. And then we have to start all over again. So it's great to coach your buyers upfront what to expect. The second phase will be the valuation. Most often they do a BPO or broker's price opinion, which is not very thorough. Remember, an asset manager is sitting in a cubicle, well, it used to be a cubicle, and probably at home now, but there's maybe in Colorado, they may be somewhere else. Real estate is not their business. So they're working with limited information. They're working with what they see on the internet, and they may ask for an it's not a full appraisal. So the information, like I have one that Leah's helping me with right now, from the outside, the place looks great. Excuse me. Not COVID, don't worry. From the outside, the place looks great, but inside there's been water damage and literally the floor fell out, in process. So we'll get into more about what you do with valuation disputes. But the second phase is when they evaluate from their end what they feel that their net bottom line number is that they'll accept. Then the third phase is where we can expect a reply. When the negotiator actually responds with either a counter or acceptance of the offer. So this is a mindset tip. As I mentioned before about the request for documentation, I would say, that old saying, when so-and-so says jump, how high? Well, in our situation with lien holders, we really have to have that mindset. Now, I say this because in my personal experience, I've had buyer agents push back. So I try to coach my cooperating agents to understand that it's not me, it's the lien holder. We have no control of this. And in fact, if the buyer doesn't respond on time, the file will close. I will tell you one story fairly recent. It was a short sale in Philadelphia that I negotiated, and the buyer agent, I'm sure he felt like he was acting on behalf of his client. And when it came to this situation, it doesn't feel fair to the buyer because you go through a long time of waiting, kind of like what feels like a black hole. And then all of a sudden they want X, Y, and Z. Your buyer may be traveling, it may be inconvenient, it may be inconvenient for you as the agent. In this situation, the buyer agent literally told me, with a little attitude, mind you, I'll get it to you when we get it to you. And despite my having coached both him and his client about expect this, as a consequence, because the documents didn't get submitted on time, the file got closed out. And we had to start all over. We ended up successfully for that client, but you're not helping your buyer if you don't understand, support, and cooperate with this process, because their offer will just get closed out. It's not personal, it's not the listing agent, it's not anything we can control. So agreement and sale tips for success. These are very important. It's very different than a standard agreement of sale, although we do use that form. And number one tip, they will want, they being the lien holders, will want all signatures in ink. Well, it doesn't have to be the original, obviously. And they need to be very clean scans. Lee and I have worked through an offer previously where, I don't know if he scanned it on his phone, but it was back and forth up front because the scan, I mean, all you have to do, I know we're all struggling with working remote, just go to Staples if you don't have access to your office. Make sure that your offer and all the documentation where there's a signature required have ink signatures, dated, complete contract, scan it into one complete document or send it over in a clean way, because these have to go to the lien holder, and you don't want the first action to be the offer's rejected because it's the wrong signatures. Not all negotiators will tell you this up front. So if you're working with a listing agent who's kind of using that paralegal model we're talking about, The offer might be submitted with DocuSign but there'll come a point when they come back, very inconvenient for your buyer. I've had this happen where they told us DocuSign was fine, but it wasn't. And so after the offer had been reviewed, they sent it back for everybody to sign. That was much more stressful for the buyer, for the seller, because then you're scrambling in that 24-hour turnaround time, or 48 sometimes, to get ink signatures and get it rescanned back. So my best suggestion, do it upfront with ink signatures, clean scan, and complete documentation. Now, locally, we don't ask for proof of cash for down payments. Expect that the lien holder will. So just go overboard in providing complete documentation. They'll need the pre-approval from the buyer. They'll need proof of cash. So just give it to them up front. The settlement date, this is very, very important. You want to allow, as a listing agent, I'm going to look for a contract that can work. If the settlement date that you're putting on the agreement of sale is less than 90 days, that shows me that, one, the buyer agent doesn't understand short sales. It doesn't mean that I'm going to suggest to reject the offer. Me personally, I'll give you a call and we'll talk about the situation and what is workable and what isn't, to help you succeed. But I would rather you know this up front so you can guide your buyers in terms of what to expect. So we need the settlement date to be at least 90 days, really, to be viable for something that we can submit to a lien holder. And tactically, we don't want the agreement of sale to expire in the middle of approvals. Yes, we could do an addendum to extend it, et cetera. And yes, better to be clean up front with a workable time frame. Now, and the tip with that also is, we touched on it before, we can go through it more in the Q&A. Buyers need to be ready to close whenever the lien holder needs to. And again, coach them. This is not going to feel fair. I've had pushback from buyers, and I understand, but it just is what it is. I hate that phrase, it's overused. But once we get lien holder approval, depending on the lien holder, it might be 30 days, it might be less. So all of the work on the buyer's side needs to be ready to go. They need to be ready to perform. And of course, we'll go through the inspections in a moment. All of that is done. So we're just waiting for lien holder approval, and who the title company is, of course, matters. We need to be ready to close as soon as the lien holder approves your buyer's offer and upon their terms. Now, a lot of times your buyers may be worried, or you might be concerned, that what happens if it goes into a black hole. It's a fair question. And of course, depending on who the negotiator is and the listing agent, it can happen, where it goes into sort of like a mess. In the meantime, your buyers are technically under agreement and they might feel trapped in a bad situation. Your escape clause would be on the short sale addendum, but please allow at least 60 days. So that gives us time to get through significantly the first two phases of negotiations with the lien holder, or close to that. But it protects your buyers that if at that point, there's some kind of sign of trouble, or they're no longer willing, they do technically have the opportunity to cancel or terminate the contract. Now, with a successful short sale, I haven't had that happen, but because we have the 90 days, they don't have to exercise that escape clause. We don't have to do additional addendum when we move past it. It just gives your buyers that peace of mind to know that they're not trapped in a situation where they don't feel like they have a lot of control, typically. Now, with Real Estate Recovery Group, they definitely will not feel like they don't have control, but we'll cover that more. Inspections, this is very important, and I think Matt and Leah can weigh in on this when we get to the Q&A, but you should do your inspections immediately upon execution of agreement of sale. If the negotiator is not requiring that, then you're in for trouble. I would say that's a bad sign, because those things need to be done up front for your buyer's protection. These sales are as is. If there's a significant problem with the property and the valuation is completely different than what you expected, this protects your buyers because they have the right to cancel on that in those first 10 days. Also, these inspections are incredibly valuable if and when we need to do a valuation dispute. I'm currently working a file with Leah where the buyer did extensive inspections, the one where the floor fell in, and has provided all that documentation to Real Estate Recovery Group, who is handling the valuation dispute. So I will share, even when I was negotiating, back in the day, it humored me to see that the lien holders, when the buyer's agent would submit CMAs and documentation about valuation, it seemed like the lien holder would listen to the buyer agent more than, or weigh their input more than they did my own. And my only, maybe it's different now, but my only guess on that was they might feel that I'm just trying to get the deal closed to get paid. But your position as a buyer agent, your view on the market for your buyer, your documentation on comps, on where you came up with your offer price, on the condition of the property, are going to be very powerful in setting your buyer up for success and working cooperatively with the negotiator to support the offer price that you have agreed upon and submitted. Important, though, to know that in some areas, especially in the suburbs, the township certs and required repairs are the obligation of the buyer. In Philadelphia, it's, the LNI cert, it's a little more straightforward, but, or simple. I won't say straightforward, but that's whether you like that or not. It can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing, because the LNI cert, that's a whole nother discussion, is pretty meaningless in Philadelphia. But in the townships, each township's different. So it's important to find that out. And again, you're going to need to work cooperatively with the listing agent to get those things resolved and done. These are out-of-pocket expenses. Coach your buyer. They're going to have to pay for their inspections. They may need to do these township repairs, the cert. They may be liable for the certs and the repairs will have to be done before settlement per the township, but we can negotiate those different things. Just prepare. They're going to have to invest in their own success here. Now this is, I did a rant on Facebook Live a week or so ago about just be nice, don't be a jerk. Just to set a tone and expectation. Sometimes, everybody's negotiation style is different. I happen to be highly collaborative in my negotiation. Not to say I can't play hardball. I can when needed. But in short sales, the listing agent is not your opponent. The seller is not your buyer's opponent. So your best success is to coach, to approach and communicate in a collaborative mindset. In no way does that violate your fiduciary responsibility. We maintain that, but at the end, you have to work towards a success for your buyer. But the seller is not there to be taken advantage of. I've had buyer agents really approach in such a negative way. It's highly offensive to the seller. In fact, I had one where they presented a very, very low ball offer on a highly desirable luxury property, and started off with this kind of comp war mentality, and then he kind of backed away from the comps and said, well, my buyer frankly just wants to take advantage of your seller's situation. My jaw dropped and I said, is this how you want me to present your offer to the seller? Yes. And so I did. And unfortunately, that soured negotiations, right? Now that seller was savvy enough to sign a C beyond personalities, and we worked with that buyer successfully, but that's not the right way to approach. Excuse me a second. The seller, nobody wants to be in foreclosure. The seller's in this situation because of circumstances largely beyond their control. And it's a very, very difficult situation, and it's emotionally taxing, it's financially taxing. It's important to have some respect for their situation. I've had other buyers say, well, why does the seller care? They shouldn't care about the price. Well, here's the thing. They are seeking debt forgiveness. It's not guaranteed. They do care. They have a lot at stake. And there is a 1099-C issued on any debt forgiveness. That means they're taxed on that debt forgiveness. So the gap is important to the seller. Of course, we want to cooperate with the fair offer for the buyer and appreciate that it may be under market in terms of the end number, but a ridiculously low offer on a short sale will not get you anywhere. And it can be offensive and sour negotiation, just like with any other negotiation. So let's respect the seller. Debt forgiveness is not guaranteed. Tax forgiveness on the 1099-C is not guaranteed either. It is in place this year, but Congress will need to extend it for next year, and let's hope they do. But again, we have no control, as we painfully know right now. We have no control over politics, and who knows what. Usually that bill is tagged into a lot of other items on a bill. It has gone back and forth since 2007. So there have been years where it's been in place and years where it hasn't. We can't control politics. So please be sensitive to the fact that the seller is facing some liability. There's no such thing as walk away free for a seller in a bad situation. They are proactively trying to resolve it. They have a lot at stake. Now, again, in terms of collaboration, I've had people disagree with me on this, but really once we're under contract, we're essentially all on the same side of the table, negotiating with the lien holder on the other side. We do maintain confidentiality, but we are working together to resolve a situation. As Chris Voss says, as he teaches negotiation with, from the FBI, when somebody has a gun to your kid's head even, he said, negotiation is not conflict. He said, you're looking at a situation from two different angles. And that is especially true with short sales. It's a situation, we're looking at it from two different angles on one side of the table, the lien holders on the other side of the table. And we can go into more questions about that in the Q&A, which leads me to number 10, ask questions. Now, in the future, you know, it's really, really good to ask questions. Now is your time, and I'm not used to being a moderator with this account, so I don't know if everyone's muted or if I need to unmute you, but I'm going to, in our question and answer, I want to touch on the real estate recovery group because it's not very familiar in Philadelphia. In fact, I think I'm one of a leading agent in bringing this model to the area. They're very, very successful, very active in New Jersey and other areas of the country. For some reason, the Philadelphia area has not really adopted this model. With the real estate recovery group, the fee is paid by the buyer. This puts you in a much stronger position for negotiating. And as I mentioned before, when you're talking to the listing agent, if you get the feeling that they're not experienced, you're not confident in the negotiator, you have an option to suggest, hey, Mr. Listing Agent, you know, just bring a different model to the table. If your buyer is willing to pay the fee, it will increase the net to the lien holder and also put you in a position where you are in more control, the buyer is more in control, and we can navigate for a better resolution on the net price to your buyer. So it may sound counterintuitive where you pay a fee, but I will tell you from firsthand experience, the net to the buyer is much better with paying that fee than being in a powerless situation with a negotiating firm where, and I'm sorry to say, some of the top law firms I've worked with locally, it really is just a paralegal pushing paperwork, not really truly negotiating the price. And we can go into more of that on the live Q&A based on what you're interested in. I'm trying to check our time. So I'm gonna, how do let me put everybody here. Should I stop? I want to share contact information for Real Estate Recovery Group. So here, make sure you do a screen capture of this, and I will send you the slides with all the contact information. Matt and Lee are going to tell you about the Facebook group that they host and a special offer they have. But just so we can see each other, I'm going to stop the screen share now and go, because I can manage the chat much better that way and make sure that your voice gets heard. Okay, hey. So are y'all muted, or does everybody have a chance to talk?
Hey, Suzanne.
It looks like everybody's muted, but You can unmute yourself, I think, because a couple of people are. Sorry, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, I think people just have to unmute themselves.
Excellent. That's the voice of Matt Marinoff. Can everybody see each other? Okay. So great, Matt. Let me put you on. There we go. I got you on Spotlight. So meet Matt Marinoff.
Hey, everybody, how are you?
So Matt is a wonderful resource. I went to Real Estate Recovery. I met him through Jay Duran on Facebook and followed him and looked at his information and was really impressed because frankly, I was going through some nightmares, as I mentioned, with some well-respected law firms in negotiating a short sale. I was like, I got to find somebody else to work with. And I went to their boot camp January of last year, I think it was. And then I went to their masterclass. And despite being having 12 years of experience, you know, and really dedicated to helping homeowners, I just was really humbled meeting Matt and Leah at the level of expertise, as well as happy to see that their passion is about helping people. So Matt is hosting a short sale boot camp this month, which is, I think, a virtual event. And he or Leah are going to go into more information about that. But he's the guy to shoot some questions to. He and Leah have seen every possible situation. They work with buyers and buyer agents directly. So who has a question? Just unmute yourself and jump in.
Is Leah on too?
She is.
Yep, I'm here.
Hi, Leah.
Hello. Does anybody have any questions maybe that you would prefer to type rather than speak? I know I have camera anxiety myself, so this should be interesting.
I'll stop.
So if nobody has questions, I can share, you know, I touched on a few things that I can go into a little more detail. I'll tell you real life stories, what has happened for me with some law firms that I've worked with. The most recently recommended law firm, both of these happen to be based in New Jersey, but cover Philadelphia area. Now, I thought that because the lawyer's involved, that the lawyer would be involved working with my seller. And that didn't really happen. What happened was once the file was put together, as I said, it's a paralegal, no disrespect, they do their job well, but they're really basically just managing the submission of paperwork, coordinating communication back and forth to parties. Most recent one I had, the law firm, I'll tell you why I switched to them. The law firm, this is one where the file got canceled. The valuation from the bank came back really pretty ridiculously high, literally $125,000 over 2 appraisals. This is for a luxury property. Now, the law firm did nothing to change that number. You know, they pushed the paperwork through. At the end of the day, the buyer was motivated enough. We were lucky on the sell side that they were willing to make up that gap. It took 2 tries because of the failure to participate in documentation. And then to my surprise, when we got the preliminary settlement statement, the closing disclosure, the listing agent, the law firm had a $30,000 additional fee that was paid out of the seller proceeds. So that meant the net to the lien holder was $30,000 less for doing title work, which they did not do. We had the title company involved. The buyer chose the title company. We had worked through the title issue successfully. And this is where my hardball negotiations come out on behalf of my client on occasion. In this occasion, I did. I pushed back really hard because that increased her deficiency unnecessarily. And frankly, that it also wasn't disclosed up front. They did not disclose that if the fee, that this is something that that's obligated. They didn't do title work. My seller was like, let's just get it done. I already have debt forgiveness. We'll just go to table. But ethically and from a good conscious standpoint, I'm like, I just can't, everything needs to be up front. You know, if you have extra fees, if a negotiator has extra fees like that, they should have disclosed it up front, which they did not. Also, the pushback that I got from the paralegal, well, you know, we negotiated, we saved your commission, and so we should get this extra fee. Well, I'll tell you, back in 2008, 2009, yes, they sometimes came back with 5% instead of 6% on commission. I haven't had that happen since then. The standard of practice has changed, and Matt and Leah can weigh in on this, that typically the bank on, so that's no negotiation. They didn't do anything. They didn't do anything to help the buyer get a reasonable offer price. And yet they successfully got an extra $30,000 at settlement. So that's where I pumped the brakes on that situation. After having worked with another law firm on several short sales here in Philadelphia, the last time I worked with them, they tried to tap into the $3,000 cash for keys. This was the Germantown situation, because they didn't feel their fee was high enough. And they reached out to my client without notifying me. My client notified me. And again, I pushed back hard on that. They pushed up to the day of settlement. This was not disclosed. It was not in writing. And in fact, he needed that to resolve some other issues in order to close. So yeah, there should be no surprises at the end like that. And that made me very disappointed and leery of negotiators. And that's when I reached out and met Real Estate Recovery Group, which is completely different. We're upfront, they're involved from the beginning, full disclosure, very clear about their fees, very clear about their passion to help both buyer and seller resolve a situation, and their inside knowledge in terms of what lien holders expect. I don't know, Leah, I don't want to put you on spot. You don't have to be on camera if you don't want to, that's fine. Do you want to add some insights about the lien holder side? What their mindset's like, and you know, maybe why, what is, it's like a black hole for most people.
Yeah, sure. So working for a major service center company for about a decade, basically on the bank side, they are trying to recoup a loss. So most of the time, most of these mortgages that are affected at this point, previous to COVID's new issue, the banks were either purchased loans in pools that were poor performing. So you would have great performing loans. If you think about a stack of papers, you have great performing loans at the top, great performing loans at the bottom, but in the middle was the garbage. And so they're going through their audit processes and seeing that these loans were poorly underwritten, pencil scratching. I mean, there's all kinds of terms I can go through, but they see that they've gotten a pretty bad portion of the portfolio. And so their bottom line is they need to save their bottom dollar. It isn't about the homeowner. At least it wasn't for a long time until the OCC became involved and CFPB became involved with some of the banks and placed consent orders and whatnot. But in the beginning, it was really about the bank. After a while, it did take a turn when the HAMP program was released. It still was kind of about the bank and the bank getting recovery services and getting what they could. But then it turned into more of the seller side when more sellers, or I should say homeowners, became, I don't want to say savvy, but became savvy to the situation and saw that the bank really wasn't there to help them, but it was actually putting them, like, I would say, bamboozling them. So, for example, the HAMP program, we'll use that. HAMP was advertised as a 2% interest rate, rock bottom, perfect, awesome. Not realizing and not reading the fine print that the HAMP program, though you may have received the 2% interest rate, it would graduate after 5 years, and now for 5 years thereafter, it would reach up to whatever the fair market was at the time of your loan modification being put in place. So if your loan mod was granted when the interest rate was 6%, yes, that'd reduce you to 2%. So you'd have 2% from the years, let's say 2005 to 2010. And then from 2011 to 2015, 16, you would slowly increase to 6%. So most homeowners are back to square one, thinking that, you know, they were in a good place. And most of those homeowners, and we've experienced it, we've had homeowners that we did mods for 6 years ago, they are now doing short sales because they can't afford it. They didn't take the opportunity to pay principal reduction payments towards their mortgage at the 2% rate. They just rocked it with a lower mortgage payment. So that has become a snowball effect. It started to flatline a little bit. So there was some concern that there was gonna be an issue, but then the automotive market went down, which is another bank lifeline. So when people don't have cars are being repossessed, you can't go to work, can't pay your bills, lose your home. That coupled with our newfound issue in pandemic, now the mortgages are starting to suffer. You have 3 major investors that have allowed to do forbearances up to a year. At first, that the forbearance was literally going to be, you don't have to pay your mortgage for 3 months, but after the 3-month period, it'll be due. But then again, you have those homeowners that became savvy that started filing complaints with FHA and with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and going to the DOJ and saying that this is completely unfair because we don't know when this is going to end. They decided to do the deferment programs, which have now granted homeowners 1 year to not pay their mortgage for those 3 investor types. However, the banks are now not getting paid for the majority of their portfolios, but they're still paying taxes and insurances. We are about to see a really, really ugly crash in the beginning of next year. At the end of the day, what it breaks down to is the bank is about recovery, and everyone thinks that our short sales have been difficult recently. It's going to get worse. You just have to be, I guess, diligent in your homework and doing your comps and doing your research on the property and any repair estimates and inspections that you may be required. Always, and Susanna's right, you have to spend a little money to make a little money. So your buyer needs to be prepared to pay for that appraisal, because you can't fight apples and oranges with the bank. You have to fight apples with apples or oranges and oranges. But I wholeheartedly think that there are some banks out there that have become seller friendly. And there are still some that are not. I think the biggest one that has had the biggest bad rap was Ocwen, and Ocwen sold their mortgages to PHH. I will by far say PHH has been the easiest bank to deal with. They are seller friendly. They will work with you. They will do value disputes. They'll talk to you. They'll talk to your seller. They'll explain the process. They will fight for you. So you just have to kind of figure out how to wade through the nonsense. So
I think it's more navigating, really. People need to learn how to navigate. One thing I want to touch on, Leah, which we get this question asked all the time: when is the moratorium going to be lifted? So here's the scary thing I think people need to understand. We got 30 days until an election. They're talking about lifting it January 1, but then they're also talking about extending it maybe into April. But here's the thing that's really super scary, and I don't think people realize this. And I really don't want to talk about it too much, but I want to make people think. How long has it been now? 7 months?
Just to clarify, Matt, you're talking about the moratorium on foreclosure auctions?
Well, I'm talking about the moratorium. I'm talking about COVID-19, how the virus has really affected not only the United States, but the world. We're going to see a lot of collapse of small businesses are going to go away. Big businesses are going to be fine. Major Chapter 13s is it 12s? And then, or 11s, I don't even know. Consult your bankruptcy attorneys for that information. But what about law firms? What about law firms that their bread and butter is foreclosure?
Yeah,
Collection.
Felon Halen Diamond Law Group closed their doors permanently yesterday, and they are one of the biggest foreclosure attorney mills in the country.
Didn't want to say the name, but I guess it's out there now.
It's public knowledge.
Now it is.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, Matt and Leah. We only have an hour, and we've got 4 minutes. They have another class for this account. I'm on this.
Yeah.
I want to, most of the people participating are within my KW family, because we share with everybody. Gary Keller in the economic address of Mega Camp was talking about I forget his name. He's the rich dad from Richard Kiyoski's Rich Dad, Poor Dad family, about the market response. I'll call it response, not recovery, because it's not recovery, is a K. When we went through the mortgage crisis, it was like a U. It went down. We were down here for a while, and then it came back up. he was very clear. It's a K. You have one segment that's not very affected, like some of the clients we're working with, but this other part that Matt's talking about. And he said, don't be overly optimistic because this is like a collapse of dominoes and how the lower segment will impact the upper segment. I don't think there's anyone who's not going to be touched by the economic impact of COVID. It's very, very important to be knowledgeable and be prepared. And I will send or post, I'm not sure the best place to do it. I want to find out who has information. Matt, we're going to share about your boot camp is the best way. You may not like short sales, but distressed properties are going to dominate the market very shortly. As unfortunately,
well, people listen, because I know we have a short period of time. People need to learn how short sales work. You might not want to do it. You might want to refer to somebody like Suzanne who actually wants to do short sales and get a referral fee. Do not walk away from helping somebody that needs to know their options. And you know, we're putting something together right now, pretty much really for the people that are watching right now. And we're running a special, and I'm only doing it for 25 people. Once it hits 25, the code's not going to work anymore. So if somebody wants to come on and they want to really hear the real hard truth, the reality about how short sales really work the correct way, then they're going to want to come on October 23rd. I know Suzanne's going to throw it out there. The code is all capitals. It's short sales, all spelled together, short sales. That's going to give you a significant discount to come on and find out information and learn short sales the correct way. You need to understand rules, regulations, and guidelines to get to the finish line. If you don't understand that, you're not going to be able to help people. It is truly people before profit, and you can make a really good living helping others and feeling good about what you're doing.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. You know, like I said, there's several topics we touched on, could be classes in and of themselves. Be sure to register for their training. You will not regret it. And hit me up, please, Susanna.Kunkel@gmail. However you want to reach out via social media, I'll get you the information and link, and you know, you can continue the dialogue. This will help you when you meet with buyers or sellers. Thanks so much for joining us today. Sorry that we have to go. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.